You've probably seen the pictures, but you might not know the story behind the photographer who took them. Edward Curtis spent his life documenting the lives of Native Americans in the early 20th century. More than 100 years later, a Denver artist is reviving that project and reproducing work in a way that truly honors the late artist. Here's 9 News reporter Noel Brennan and photojournalist Scott Wright.
And we get the spritzer and the brush.
Persistence is patience. It's never brushing over a step or settling too soon.
It has to be just right, like Goldilocks.
Getting it just right.
It's reddish, chestnut, walnutty brown with a little bit of red in the brown and a little bit of raw umber.
Takes devotion.
Over 10,000 tries, over 7 years.
Paul Unks devotes himself to an old craft, pressing ink
Let me get a good strike.
to tissue paper,
And it's looking good.
reproducing the iconic photographs Edward Curtis took 100 years ago.
He was the first National Geographic type of photographer, combining both history, culture, and art.
Edward Curtis knew persistence. He spent 30 years photographing Native Americans west of the Mississippi from the Mexican border to northern Alaska. He earned their trust and gained access to more than 80 tribes.
He was overtaken by an image, a vision of a vanishing race, and was very driven to capture their way of life before it was gone forever, before it vanished. And thank God he did it, because I can't imagine not having this record.
The North American Indian was Curtis's master work, a 20-volume set of books and hand-pressed photos or photogravures printed off copper plates coated in ink.
Takes you back in time over 100 years ago, showing them at the height of their culture, of their 19th century culture of the 1800s. It's just priceless.
And extremely rare. 250 sets were made, few are still intact, and one changed Paul Unk's life.
I will never forget that he got tears in his eyes.
University of Denver historian Steve Fisher remembers that moment 25 years ago. Paul was teaching a night class at DU.
One of his students, one day, the guy got into a conversation about Curtis, said to him, "Have you seen the set in the Penrose Library here at DU?" And he said, "No."
After class, Paul stopped by the library, and Steve brought out the stacks of books and portfolios.
Right here, close up, one of the best sets of his work I've ever seen. I've been studying his work since 1971.
Paul was moved to recreate Curtis's work, something he quickly realized was not going to be easy.
And so many times, hundreds of times, it just kept falling short, and I heard Curtis behind me saying, "No, that's not good enough."
After 7 years of trial and error,
We finally got a good etching on a plate, good inking, and a good pressing on the tissue paper, and I heard him say, "That'll do."
Paul's reproductions are now on display at John Fielder's Art Gallery in Denver. Edward Curtis's 100-year-old photographs pop from their frames in stunning detail and clarity. The work means most to those who recognize the faces in Curtis's photographs.
When I see someone like Red Hawk, I just, my ancestors flash before my mind's eye, and, I think about them a lot.
Ben Sherman cherishes the photo of Lakota warrior Red Hawk on horseback.
Well, you see, the Badlands are my homeland, and it just takes me back to my homelands just in an instant when I see that.
Back at the studio,
Yeah, that's a nice one.
Paul's work continues.
Very nice highlights in the rock, but before it dries, I need to touch up some spots in it.
And he's as persistent as ever to get it just right.
Copious trial and error, but we learn from each mistake.
In Denver, Noel Brennan, 9 News.
They are beautiful scenes. They are poignant looks at America as it once was. Paul Unk's reproductions of Curtis's photographs will be on display at John Fielder's Colorado until Friday, July 31st.